welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. Guys, we have ourselves a very fun topic today. Obviously, conference realignment is never ending. Right now, the ACC is under pressure with multiple people going to court against the ACC, but also, too, potentially other conferences. Even Texas A&M has been out there about potentially leaving the SEC, but we won't go into that today. Today, we have ourselves a draft. I'll get to more of that here in a second. But first, the show is sponsored by Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Again, Colonial Beer, really good people, supported by Pitt men here in the city of Pittsburgh. Obviously, helps support Alliance 412, which is a preferred collective of the University of Pittsburgh and helps pay the players at the University of Pittsburgh. So again, go over and see my friends at Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Again, guys, a great discussion today, obviously, with conference realignment. And I've told you guys a number of different times on different shows I've had on here, I don't see the NCAA holding on to the Power Four, or in this case today, the top 68 teams. And recently, today, an article came out from FootballScoop, which, again, I like them a lot. They do a lot of good work, especially Zach Barnett, who I'm going to be able to quote here in a second and pull it up and share it on the screen with you guys. But a 68-team league, and I think that it's going to come to a point where there's going to be really two divisions in the Power Five, or I guess really in the FBS level. 68 teams who really can believe they can compete at a high level, and then everybody else who really stays behind with the NCAA and follows their rules. I truly believe we're coming to a moment in time where it's coming to a halt, where we are more and more really realizing college football is going in the NFL direction, and a more like an NFL style type of league where you have an AFC or an NFC or an East and West division, two different conferences. I think it's becoming more and more likely, especially with the money that's being thrown around at this point. And I think it's coming to a point, too, where each of these conferences are finding teams that don't really have the resources to be able to compete at a certain level. But there was a result here coming today from FootballScoop that talked about the attractiveness, but also, too, Tony Altimore, who put out a tweet talking about the attractiveness in conference realignment. And I think it was really interesting, especially when you look at the rankings and how they were able to put this together. It's something that was pretty interesting. And I thought I'd be able to share that with you guys today and just create a discussion, which, to be honest with you, there's a number of these that I truly believe are actually correct. So now let's see here. Pull this up here. All right, there we go. Let's see if we can make that a little bit bigger for you guys there. A little too big. There we go. So obviously, here's the article here from FootballScoop. And again, I talked about this before. I just truly believe this is a really cool article and one that I've talked about before. But FootballScoop, every FBS school ranked by how attractive they'd be in conference realignment. If every FBS school was placed in a draft, who gets taken first and who gets taken last? Zach Barnett, again, a great article. But it leads off here. The Big Ten is now the Big 18. Clemson and Florida State, obviously in the ACC, are trying to sue their way out of the ACC. If successful, others will follow. But those potential moves and others that preceded it, the Red River Rivals to the SEC, the top third of the Pac-12 to the Big Ten, may just be tremors compared to the real earthquake that is to come. The theory goes that when the upper echelon of college football leaves the NCAA, they won't leave intact a conference as we know them today. Ohio State isn't kicking Purdue out of the Big Ten to choose two programs totally at random. They just simply are not inviting them to the next iteration of college football, or Fox and ESPN aren't inviting them. And I think that's a critical part right there. And why I've been saying this before, I think Fox, ESPN, but I also think Apple's going to get involved. I've kind of created multiple scenarios from things that I've heard. But clearly, Fox and ESPN, NBC, CBS, they are certainly in terms of pushing what's going on in conference realignment. But in that article right there, just in that section right there, obviously, Ohio State isn't going to kick Purdue out of the Big Ten, but there's a certain way they're going to try to be able to eliminate certain schools who don't want to compete. It goes on. Tony Altimore, a strategy consultant, attempted to rank every FBS program along with roughly 50 factors that a television executive and or university president would find important. It takes about 50 factors broken down in the groups described in the summary, balances into points, and then weighs weights them based on input from experts to create a broad-based look at the overall attractiveness, Altimore told me. In short, Altimore found long-term football success and television viewership to be highly correlated. Turns out TV executives might know what they're doing. Obviously, that's kind of a big thing. Viewership, how well you've done in football, not just in a year or two, but really, I would say probably this puts it into the 5 to 10 year range. Realignment attractiveness score, a quantitative perspective. We wanted to build a model that quantifies a wide range of key factors to look at the realignment attractiveness of each current FBA school, and the results that were quite interesting and help explain a lot. Obviously, the realignment attractiveness score, obviously he did it by conferences, obviously the Power Four at this point, and then obviously the Group of Five. But as you can see, really the Big Ten leading the way, SEC at number 2, and then viewership with number 3 with the ACC. Obviously, the ACC and the SEC are pretty close. I think when you look at the Big 12, they're falling behind a little bit, obviously. I think their rankings and their ratings overall, with Oklahoma and Texas now leaving the conference, is really going to try to struggle and hurt them in a way. Big brands are obviously still alive in the Big Ten, SEC, and the ACC, but we'll continue to see and monitor what the ACC looks like. Does it truly fall apart? Or in terms of what the SEC, the ESPN executives have said, it stays together, but only some teams stay behind. But in this aspect today, it might not matter what that conference does, because we might have a 68-team league, and it goes into a little bit here. Setting aside a statistical mumbo-jumbo, if every FCS program were put into a pot for ESPN and Fox to draft, who gets taken first and who gets taken last? I found Altimore's model to overrate California schools, which I agree with. There's no way UCLA is getting taken before LSU or Cal before Oregon, but at the very least, it's an interesting conversation driver or a panic-inducing one, depending upon where your score falls. Here are the top, really, I think, overall, when you look at it, I think it goes all the way down to 60, 80, it goes all the way to 100, okay, obviously, but we won't do 100. I think in retrospect, it would be able to do what we like to say is, in reality, 68-team league, 64 teams to 68-team leagues. But this is a very, I think, very collectively good overall ranking. And Zach puts it out here, especially from TV executives and how they're ranked in points between what Tony Altimore was saying, plus what Zach's saying, which I looked at this and I reviewed it. I think it's pretty clear. And honestly, I think it's pretty fair, to be honest with you. And it kind of correlates with teams that could compete at the highest level, especially in a 68-team league. Obviously, at number 1, you have Ohio State, then Michigan, Alabama, USC, Texas, Notre Dame, Georgia, Penn State, Florida, UCLA, Oklahoma, LSU, Texas A&M. Obviously, you see there that the top 13 teams. I think that's the biggest brand you can see out there. Obviously, they're going to be in there, and I think that's correct. Some of these, I think you can wager back and forth where they're going to be ranked at. But here at number 14, Wisconsin, then Stanford. I think Stanford's a little, that's probably the only one I really have a question about, is that they're probably a little too high. But overall, when you look at their athletic program, especially their non-revenue sports, they're the best in the nation. But obviously, football has taken a step back. David Shaw had a little bit of an issue there for a number of years, but it's understandable why they're up there in terms of why they're there. Then you have Washington, Michigan State, Tennessee, Florida State, and then Clemson. Obviously, Florida State and Clemson, 2 big brands out of the ACC. Iowa, Cal, Nebraska, North Carolina at number 23, Minnesota, Miami, Oregon, Pitt at 28, Maryland at 29, Arkansas to finish out your top 30. Now you start getting into where these last 34 teams come from. Auburn at 31, then Utah, Kentucky, Illinois, Arizona State, TCU at 35, Oklahoma State, Indiana, Purdue, Duke, Colorado, NC State, Ole Miss at 43. Then you get Virginia, Northwestern, Virginia Tech, Missouri, Arizona, Rutgers, and then South Carolina at 50. And here we go to really like the final portions of it here. At number 51, West Virginia, Georgia Tech, then Louisville, Syracuse, Iowa State, Kansas, Texas Tech, Mississippi State, Kansas State, and Boston College at number 60. And where those last 8 spots really lie, it's right here: Army, Houston, Washington State, Vanderbilt, Baylor, Cincinnati, Navy, and an Oregon State right there at 68. I think personally, I would take out, Army and Navy. I would put easily in there. Um, I would put, I could put UCF in there. I could even see South Florida for how they've gone up. Potentially BYU. I think you can see them in there. But obviously, after that 68, after those last margins where you could really argue who's where and what the why. Obviously, Wake Forest left out, potentially BYU, potentially South Florida, SMU, UConn, Temple, San Diego State, Boise State, Memphis. Obviously, these, you're getting down to the group of 5 at this point: Tulane, Air Force. And you keep going down the list here, notable schools being left out. Obviously in the group of 5, obviously you've got smaller schools: Buffalo, Tulsa, UAB, New Mexico. They're all here. James Madison, even though they've done well, especially within their football program, UNLV to finish it out. Obviously, they did really well this past year, but obviously it's based off of more than just football results, also viewership. All of those things go into play. But overall, I think it's a pretty damn good list overall of who's going to compete and who couldn't. I really liked how they went about it and created that list overall to make it really functional, to say the least. Stop sharing that here. But overall, when you look at that list, I mean, you've got your major programs right there at the top. I think when you look at it, I mean, your Ohio States, your Michigans, Alabama, USC, Texas, Notre Dame. I think those are clear ones when you look at it and say, okay, hey, those are the largest brands. They're in there for a reason. And it's not just based off of, and I like how they calculated it. It's not just based off of the football success, but also too the attractiveness from TV revenues. Where's the market at? Where each market at? But also too resources. Resources go into a lot of this stuff in terms of how they're able to compete, donor bases, NIL collectives. Obviously, some teams on this list you've seen rise up the rankings or why they're so high. A lot of them really have great NIL in terms of what their resources look like. NIL resources, the certain markets that they're in. And then there's some schools that you might have said, man, I might have had them a little bit higher. But where they are in terms of TV attractiveness, what their ratings look like, what their viewership numbers look like, those certainly all create different types of questions to where, does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Those are really the biggest things. Overall, guys, as always and forever, you guys got to subscribe to the channel. We'll be having player interviews from across the country. Be able to subscribe to the channel. Let me hear your thoughts down below, guys. Create in the comments section. Always like having comments and dialogue with you guys. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Who are in your top 68? If you had to create a league of top 68, who would you make? Obviously, in that list I just read you there, who would you leave out of that list? Who do you think maybe, they're a little bit too high, this team's a little bit too low, but more important, this team should not be in there? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Of course, guys, like and subscribe to the channel. The channel is growing at a rapid rate. We're almost to 1,000. Subscribe to the channel today, guys. Again, guys, it's been another great episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Leave your comments down below. I'd like to hear your thoughts. As always and forever, hail to Pitt.